For our guests tonight, and the magazines are free of charge. So today we are gathering in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, who have been caretakers of this land. And it is also home to many Indigenous people who are unnamed or unrecognized. This is a site of human activity and dance for tens of thousands of years, and it is important to acknowledge that ceremonial and artistic practices, including dance, were banned for decades, affecting everyday life, personhood identity as part of government policies, and ongoing genocide. We are gathering today also at a time where people and Indigenous peoples in different parts of the world, including the Middle East, the Caribbean, Northeastern and Central Africa, that are subject to violence, war, genocide, and censorship. I am a descendant of the African and other nations on the island of Quisqueya, Haiti, also recognized as Haiti in the Caribbean. And I would like to acknowledge that many elders here, Indigenous elders here, have shared with me much information and shared their teachings. So I join you, and we all join you in Toronto to celebrate the works of these writers and artists. Let's welcome them. So we'll start with some questions, discussion, and we'll invite the audience to also join in. And so the first question I'd like to ask is for you to please tell us in a nutshell what your book is about and what you would like people to take away from your book.
Okay, I'll start us off. Our book, we will remember this, Bhattacharya Swaha, is in short a collage of essays, interactive prompts, and journal reflections of the creative process of Swaha, Nova Dance's largest dance production. And I guess it's about creating during a period of forced stoppage, so the pandemic. And if there's one thing I want people to take away from the book, it's that artists make art, regardless of the conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Kaeja, and my book is called I Found My Dance in a Bomb Shelter, Anecdotes of Gratitude for the Life of Dance. And in a nutshell, the book encapsulates three major aspects of my life. My father was a Holocaust survivor, and the works that I've created and dedicated to him. My family, with my wife Kaeja and my children, and the importance of family, including my siblings and experiences. And then my experiences as a choreographer and a dance artist, having had 40 years in this community, creating major dance festivals and events and things like that help propel and elevate our community. So one of the things that I would love for somebody who reads the book as a takeaway is how essential passion is in terms of pursuing what we believe so deeply in.
Thank you.
In terms of what I hope people will take away from it, I really hope that it's the fact of dance being the ultimate ritual of gathering and how much it enabled the group of artists who wrote in this book to survive this unprecedented event in our generation, and also that this is our time and our stories need to be told. It's the story of a work that featured 22 women of color on stage, and they all come from a range of different cultural backgrounds and different dance practices, and the fact that dance is the ultimate language that we communicate with. And so I'm trying to get to, we really need to stress how important dance is in society right now, because the more we know it and believe it, the more its impact can be felt.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Bowring. This is my book, Navigating Home, Artists of the Newfoundland and Labrador Dance Project. which was a project that happened in St. John's in 2017 and 2018. It culminated with performance events in 2019. And the whole point of it was to bring together Newfoundland dance artists who had moved away from home and those who had either moved and come back or stayed. And they came together to create new work. So the book tells each of their individual stories and ties their stories into different aspects of Newfoundland's greater history. And I think the thing that I would like people to take away from it is to just have a better understanding of Newfoundland and Labrador. I think we are still considered very an underestimated province, newest to Confederation, and there are still misunderstandings about the province and the people that come from there. In fact, shockingly, I heard a Newfie joke the other day. I heard someone tell a Newfie joke, and that really surprised me because I haven't heard one since, I'd say, the 80s.
Thank you. And I also wanted to highlight that just in looking through your books, your answers also remind me of like the importance of collective, of family, community as well. And I was struck by all the love that there was in each of your books. I could tell you were really very invested emotionally, so thank you for that. And so what was your writing process like, or in the case of Nova, the process of knowing that you were writing this book and putting together the documentation? And what struck you in the research or in the research process? Would you like me to repeat? If ever you need me to repeat, I can.
I'll start part of it and then I'll pass off to Brannavy to talk about the research process, because you did research about me in the writing, whereas I was mostly focused on creating the work. So the process was, like, we were coming out of the pandemic, we knew we were going back into it. I connected Amy and Brannavy and said we should do something, and then but it was just all happening. And I was also recently, somebody else read the book and was talking to me about it, and I suddenly realized it's like, none of us who were in the book are ever going to be able to have that experience, because we were so in it. We were living the pandemic, we were living trying to make this piece, we were living trying to make a piece with 22 dancers with a company that, you know, does not have the budget the size of the National Ballet, and all the things that we did. And then even when the book was published, we did its first outside of Toronto performances in Vancouver. So we were having the experience of the entire original cast going to another city and doing the show, and then there was a book, and there was a book launch, and we were walking the streets in our, you know, saris and looking fantastic, and like it was all happening. And the process of research, probably we'll talk to you about.
Thanks, Nova. I'd like to say that this book took 3 months and 5 years at the same time, because what was so different that Nova did was in 2018, when I was 24 at the time, I had reviewed one of her works, it resonated, and I was invited to observe not just rehearsals, but like dialogue that was happening at an organizational level at Nova Dance. And I was invited into practices and creative labs virtually across the pandemic, and I became in some ways deeply informed about the Nova Dance creative process, but also technique that inevitably produced this body of writing, because I was observing and documenting. And then the pandemic struck, and Nova was like, hey, like, what do you think about being a writer in residence? And I had never heard of a dance company carving out a position for writers. And that was really interesting to me. And I was, of course, so excited about the opportunity. So to answer your question, the research was informed by being embedded in the company in a way that I think writers often are not in artistic processes, and is so integral and gives rise essentially to publication, to documentation, to relationships, to archives like DCD. So that was really special. And I have to shout out Mark, Nova's partner, because he had so painstakingly and dedicatedly kind of archived a lot of Nova's career through like these binders that were in a chronological order and had things as delicate as like programs to like exchanges, and it was like real archival research that I was doing at Nova's house when we could meet, because of course that was so limited through the pandemic. But it felt really cool to have that access to a story and an artist's relationship to the city. So yeah, that's the research process. It was long and short, and then we were writing in the span of 3 months.
I actually never intended to be a writer, and I never intended to be a filmmaker, a dance artist, a choreographer, to marry the love of my life, though that was a miracle and a gift. And I never intended to run away from home with a stolen car and a pregnant girlfriend, be kicked off the island of Eos. Those are other stories. But I was choreographing for Wendy and Peter Pan at the Stratford Festival with director Kira Lockwood. And we were 2 weeks from previews opening. This was in 2020. The pandemic hit, and festival was shut down. And I called Karen and I said, honey, let's go north. We have a family place up north. And we landed up north, and that very first Thursday, I remember looking on Facebook, and there was people that write things called Throwback Thursdays. And I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I'll try one. And I was about to start, and I thought, you know what, something is wrong about this for me. And over my life, I've had a huge variety of experiences. And I've always wanted to thank people who had deep impact in my life. But many of them, like some of my ancestors or my high school teachers or wrestling coach, had no clue. And so I started what I called Thank You Thursdays, to thank those who had a deep impact in my life. And most of them would never have any idea, but then people like Karen or our children would know, and I had special thank yous for them. And I started writing them, and I dedicated to do one a week while we were locked away over the pandemic, and pretty soon I had 52 of them, and then I had 70 of them. And because it also involved research, and Karen and I are just avid archivists, I would drive into Toronto, go through our archives, draw photos and some of the writings, go back up and do my Thank You Thursday. And then after about 67 of them, I was talking to Amy, and Amy said, this is an amazing collection, you should think about a book. And I said, great, let's do it. And so after 2 years, I had 104 Thank You Thursdays. And Amy and I began editing, and that was 2 years of editing before we finished the book. So that's where the book came from. That was
So my process started as a chronicler. So when we had our creative processes in 2017 and 2018, I was brought in to basically sit in the studio with my journal and chronicle what was happening. And the two sort of creative leads were Christopher House and Anne Troke. So a Newfoundlander who had moved away and a Newfoundlander who had come home. And then the idea was that there would be a book at the end of this. So then, after the chronicling process, my process was to, in order to meet the deadline, was to write from 4 a.m. to 6:30 every morning, and then get ready for work, take the GO train, and help my husband get our boys ready for school. That was a little nuts, and I don't recommend it, but, you know, necessity. So, but the research process was super fun. I come from a long history of people who have been writing down our family history. And so I've always been steeped in these stories of Newfoundland, but with writing all of these other literary portraits of these different artists, I was able to delve into different aspects of Newfoundland history that were less familiar. So for example, one of the artists, his grandparents had come over. His grandfather was a doctor, and he had been hired to educate and fight tuberculosis. And in those days, the outports were only connected by water, not by roads. So there was a tuberculosis boat that went from outport to outport, and they went in, they tested people, educated people, medicated people. So I dove into that history. There were, people who had been there for 7 generations and people who had been there for 1. And what I found that was really interesting was that each one somehow tied into a different area of Newfoundland, a different period in history. And so that was really fun, tying in those non-dance parts of Newfoundland's history into these dance stories.
Thank you so much. And I would actually like to invite us to clap for the guests, because I feel like you've all done immense documentation and archival work that was necessary. And I think it's important to recognize that, because it's very difficult work, and also because, some of us don't have the opportunity, or even the resources, the means, the opportunities to do this. So thank you. And so, and also, I wanted to say that gratitude shines through each book, and there are autobiographical elements also that I actually didn't quite expect when I first approached the book. So, Amy, I really enjoyed your notes, and I could feel, actually I found it very touching. And Nova and Brannavy also. The fact that you really detailed the names of every single dancer, the dates, where they were, I thought that was fantastic. And Alan also, I felt like there was just so much love for your family, your children. Like I learned a lot that I just didn't expect to learn. And also I think that you provide something for your communities, which is quite important and interesting. And so the next question I had was, and this maybe is a bit repetitive, but how was it to write? Actually, I don't let you answer. How was it to write? Does it tie, does the writing process, or does this process, how does it tie to your dancing? I mean, Nova, you already sort of answered this, so maybe do you want to comment further on what the process brought up for you as an artist? Because now you're working in a different form, which is writing, but most of you are used to using your body to tell stories. So how was that?
It was stressful. There were times where I was like, Amy, can we just call it a book in progress, a book in process? to really put things in print and know that, even as you're putting them in print, you're going to grow beyond what you thought, and you're going to have realizations and learn that maybe what you were thinking was a little bit, oh, that was what I was thinking then, and this is what I'm thinking now. It was also the thing, though, about your original question about the similarity or to the creative process, and we talked about this in the book, in fact. So, yes, pre-pandemic, Brannavy was spending a lot of time with the company. Then during the pandemic, we did the residency, so she was looking at videos of different works and things like that. But by the time we got out and were going into actually making it, then Brannavy had a really fantastic job. I forget what it was, but it was great. The Toronto Ward Museum. And anyway, so she was just not able to be in the studio and then watch Swaha actually coming together. So she had different parts of background information, but then she wasn't going to see it until it was premiered, and we had book deadlines. And so then it became very similar to my choreographic process, in as much as it became collage assembly. And so there were, Brannavy was working on essays. I knew I was going to do the essay at the end. then from the very beginning of the process, I'd been getting the dancers to write, and they were paid for hours of writing time to write about their experience of the work. So we had all these different things, and then we just started putting it together, and we had some late night email exchanges as well. So that was a fun part of the process to go, okay, this is the way I make dances, and now this is how we're going to make a book.
Creative process is absolutely fascinating. We just never know where the inspiration is coming from, and we need to trust our gut instinct. And for myself in this writing process, I didn't know I was writing anything. I was just doing my gratitudes for my life, and as it began to take shape, it was like a choreography. It's like you have a set of movements, and then when Amy and I were talking about how are we going to put together this book, one of the things that we came up with is like a choreography. I didn't want it to be personal. I didn't want it to be chronological. I was born, I'm here now, and I will be dead, but that's a different matter. But I wanted to take a look at it contextually as we created choreography, where we took a section of my life that had deep impact and influence, what that might be, and we chronological that. And so we did it from my early youth into my creative years, into my father's life, into my family's life, and so we took everything, and so it became a choreography. So for me, the book is a fluid, I'm hoping poignant work from the very beginning to the very end. And when Paula was talking about it, she said by the time she got to my father's section, it had such an impact for her because she understood contextually where this was all coming from.
Not much to add from what Nova shared. The book came together very similar to Nova's creative or choreographic process. It was kind of like fragments, but then started to make sense together. But the one thing I wanted to add was there was a point in the pandemic where I emailed Nova and I was like, hey, I can't write anymore. There's so much death and grief and misery, and I simply cannot write anymore, and maybe you should fire me, this is not gonna work. And I actually don't think this is feasible. And Nova had said, hey, would you be interested in a mentor? And I had never actually received mentorship as a writer previous to that, and I was so confused by that response. And I was paired with Geetanjali Kolanad, who is an incredible dance artist herself and writer, and she worked with me. She worked with me in a really routine fashion where we would have sessions over Zoom, and she would expect a certain amount of text or words to be produced, and she offered me techniques that I still use to this day with my writing that was invaluable. And I really, I feel so lucky to have had that experience and kind of that bridge when it all became too much. And actually my favorite essay in the book is a product of that mentorship process.
A relay race. So unlike Alan and Nova, I don't have a choreographic process, obviously, and my career path in dance ended during my post-secondary training because of an injury. But I actually do move a fair bit in certain parts of my writing process. So for example, in between the literary portraits of the different artists in the book, there are passages from my journal writing during the creative processes. And as a writer, or as a dance writer specifically, always tried to push myself in finding ways to describe movement, because it's an ephemeral art form, and you're trying to capture something that happens in a moment through language, which is, I find, a wonderfully stimulating challenge. And so I do find myself sometimes when I was going back through my journals in order to pull out these excerpts or tweak them a bit, doing the movements that I remember from the rehearsal process and physicalizing so that I could think to myself, okay, what is the language I would use to describe that particular way of moving? So that, yes, that dancing life definitely has continued to inform my writing process.
Thank you. And I was also thinking about how it sounds like you each had a ritual, like something that would ground the process. So in your case, Alan, it was the post. Nova, it was the namaskaram, I feel. And then in your case, it was like...
4 a.m.
Yes. But that's great because I feel like you set a place or a time to get it done. And would you like to talk a bit more about that, or we just want to sit with it?
Well, I will say, like, part of that 4 a.m. to 6:30 writing process, because it's the quietest time in my house. Our boys were school-age children then, and so it was a very peaceful time, and I did enjoy that, just the absolute quiet in the house at that moment, and definitely the ritual was very grounding. Every day, just having this space in my life for this one thing where no one was going to ask for anything, but yeah, it was a very good process to have.
Yeah, actually, if I wasn't a dancer, I'd be a history teacher. Like, I just love history, and delving into and doing research and studying. So, you know, I was mentioning, I go back to Toronto into our archives, but I also took this time period because you're right, I had a deadline. Every week it had to be done, right? And depending on the context of the subject, I would write something and Karen would say to me, Alan, are you sure Sylvie would agree with this? Bouchard, right, one of the chapters. And so I would send her the chapter, I'd write to her. I began reaching out to people who I hadn't talked to, in some cases for decades. And that was part of this ritual, and the deadline was perfect for me to be able to accomplish each one. Yeah, so it's kind of cool.
I guess, so Emilie mentioned the namaskaram, which is it's many different things. It can be a performative ritual in Indian classical dance forms. It can also be a greeting between friends. And I've created an abstraction of it, and it's a ritual that I do with the company. But in terms of this book, I'm just remembering like the very first lines of my essay where when I finally was like, okay, now all these other pieces are in, and I'm pulling it all together to come to this conclusion. And even like the opening words of that essay invite the reader to inhale and breathe and release from their fingertips, because that was really my only way to get into it, was to move my way into it. Which I did when I wrote for Kevin too.
And I'm curious to know, how did this book or the process change you? Or maybe it didn't, right?
I would say, like, so in my book I talk about being kind of, do I use the word bicultural? I can't remember the word exactly I use. So I come from pre-Confederation Newfoundlanders who raised us in Ontario. And so in order to make us fully understand our heritage, food and language and movement was always a part of our upbringing, to let us know about, you know, that heritage. And I would say this process of discovery, I had always sort of felt like a quasi-Newfoundlander in a way that, because I was raised here, I wasn't born there, unlike my older brother who was born there. And I feel like the whole project, through the creative processes and the book writing, instilled in me a better sense of who I am as a diasporic Newfoundlander. And that's where I finally figured out, oh yeah, we are a diaspora. In the sense that, like, there are Newfoundland stores in Ontario. There aren't Alberta stores, right? There aren't BC stores. There's Newfoundland stores that sell very distinct foods and other products, mittens that only come from that place, right? So, yeah, so I would say that that's how it changed me. It made me understand or have a better sense of myself.
Honestly, that stumps me. I don't know. How has this book changed me? I think for a long time I was like, dance was a ritual in many ways. Like I was going to dance classes since I was 5, and we would like drive to Scarborough and like spend the entire day there, and that was so much a part of my childhood, my adolescence, how I defined myself. However, while I would try to go to class where I could, it was no longer a constant. And this book helped me revisit Bharatanatyam and other forms of dance with a lot more compassion, less seriousness, more fun, and that was nice. It was nice to approach dance truthfully as a writer versus a dancer. And now actually I'm inspired to go back to dancing. So like that relationship has always been fluid to me.
For me, there were 3 things that, there was the book, there was the making of Swaha, and also during the pandemic, I had a non-COVID related health crash, which, like, the day Toronto went into lockdown, I had to go to a hospital, and then that very beginning of the pandemic, I was going to hospitals, and I had a get out of jail free card from lockdown, so I could go to the hospital. And anyway, I almost died on a Zoom call, and Laurent Soulnier saved my life. And now that story is in this book. And the fact that I also didn't die and made Swaha, it did happen, that exists in that book. And then Miriam was often saying, while we were writing the book, that the book is going to outlive us all. And so it definitely gave me, I've always been a lover of books, but it gave me more appreciation for the potency of it, and especially because of the approach Brannavy and I were taking of including so many voices of so many dancers. And so it all kind of swirled back into something I say about my work, which is I make dances about dancers. And my dances tell the stories of different dancers, and now those stories are tangible, so it felt like a very, like everything just came together in a beautiful way.
I just want to add to that, and that is what Miriam Adams says, that books will outlive us all, is so true. And for an ephemeral art form, it's even more important. And as I've said frequently, dance books are a total money loser from a business sense. There's no good monetary reason for producing them. But the thing is, now it's written down. No one can deny that we have this legacy. We have put it in print, and it is on shelves all over the place in perpetuity. And that's really important.
And the one thing that, just to touch upon this, hasn't changed me. I feel that everything we do in our lives changes us, no matter what, every micro moment. And I've always said that. And when Amy talked about the cover of the book, the first thing I said was to my children, which photo should I use? Amy wants a photo, and they said, Dad, there's a no room, right? And so it's all about, for me, it's all about family. And not only ancestry, but our future generations, and now Karen and I are grandparents. And for me, it's so essential that I also have this to pass down. Like I remember at one point, Mika's like 5 years old, and says, Dad, I'm in your films, right? I said, yeah. And I'm the films are like in major museums around the world, right? I said, yeah. She goes, so that means that I'm going to be around for at least 1,000 years, right? This is 5-year-old Mika. And it's true. And so being able to contextualize, and it's a beautiful way to look at your life and express it in, you know, so many different ways. But it's also allowed me to look at other things that I can do. Like, for example, you know, I'm now very interested in now doing a podcast because of this that deals with intergenerational trauma, the arts, and healing. You know, it just opens so many venues, so many opportunities. You know, and everything that we do is just part of the current that sails us through our lives.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's a big one, is documenting in a ephemeral form, but also the stories of the people, like the lives that you talk about. I think for me that was striking, or it was, yeah, because I do this sort of work of looking back into the 1800s to understand who, you know, these Black women performers were, and so just thinking about the impact that your work will have in the future. And so I'd like to ask you, is there anything that you would like to say to each other, or that as you were listening to the conversation, maybe you saw some parallels between each other's work that I happened to have highlighted?
Well, I think there are definitely reoccurring themes, which we've talked a bit about. That they all have an autobiographical element in some way. Diaspora factors into all of them in some way, and creative process as well. One thing I will say is how much I have enjoyed this process of editing with these writers, something that I have inherited from Miriam Adams, DCD's co-founder, who it's our founders, Lawrence and Miriam Adams, who started this whole notion of dance publishing in Canada, and we've published 43, wait, were you 43? I was 41, 42. We published 42 books.
Those are our ages.
Yeah, right. Since the early 1990s, and there's 2 more in the cooker. So, but it really, I really do love the process of editing and playing with language and working with these different writers. That was really fun for sure. And yes, lots of late night texting.
This doesn't really answer what you were talking about,
Sure.
but one of the things that I ended up having a lot of fun doing with Amy was when we were working on the glossary. Like, it felt like we spent way more time on the glossary all of a sudden than all the other writing, and we were just like, it suddenly became so important, and then we did things that we thought were bold and cheeky, like how we described modern dance. But, you know, there's been no pushback. Nobody's coming. But it was, again, in that pinning something down and describing dance in words or trying to give a historical context, it was really wonderful to have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people, because there are, especially when you're talking about diasporic art forms, for example, Odissi, there was a definition in a previous DCD publication, which when we were working on the book, the conversations had shifted and there was a lot more awareness about Odissi. Originally, a lot of people thought it was really connected to one particular group. But then as the history of it emerged, there were 5 of them, and 5 of them had actually written a blood pact of how they were going to revive this art form. So then we got to shed that bit of light on it. So things like that were really also part of the research and the conversation and the community of it all.
I have the microphone, it's a dangerous thing. I have a question that I would like to ask, and that is, for yourselves, could you envision your book becoming a film?
Yeah, absolutely, because the book is kind of a documentary about the making of the process. And we could, like, we wouldn't be able to recreate the rehearsal, but we could certainly be having conversations with all the artists leading up to a remount. I think it should be done in Toronto every year. Is there a presenter in the house? Yeah, absolutely, I think. And Swaha itself, there's so many things inside of the work that, like, I know there's one thing where I've thought about you and when we did gimbal class during the pandemic on the internet, and I was like, oh, that thing that Alan talked about with the gimbals, when the recitation's happening, the camera definitely has to be circling the cast, so it's there, we should talk.
I agree 100%. How about you?
Yeah, I could see it because they're all stories, and they all have stories within the stories, right? Like there's the story of the artist, and then there's the historical story, usually related to the families. So it could be a series of vignettes. What do you think, Josh?
I'm down.
Josh is in it.
Great. Well, that's a lot to think about. No, it's really exciting, actually. And so we'd like to invite the audience members, if you have any questions or comments, please share them.
And there's a microphone over here if you want to go to that, because that way your audio will be picked up by the camera.
Yes.
I have a question, and it sort of relates to Alan's choice of his photograph. But choosing the title of the book is sometimes quite difficult, the exact wording. So how did you settle on your final titles, assuming you actually went through a process?
Right, so Jane is asking how we came to the titles that we settled on. So one of the things that I talk about in my book is how I had this, I had a different understanding of home when I was growing up. There was the home that I lived in, and then there was the home that my parents referred to. And I would hear them on the phone with their parents saying, yes, we're coming home, or no, we can't make it home this year, things like that. And so I grew up with this sense of there being two homes, and how different each of these homes were, you know, geographically and meteorologically and culturally. And it was something that came up a lot when I was talking to the different artists, this whole idea of navigating this place and the reasons, the push-pull factors, right? Why people will leave and then come back to the island or never return to the island, and that complicated relationship that people had with home. So that was where navigating home came.
Thank you.
I can't remember all of it, so hopefully you'll fill in some blanks. But the part about we will remember this came from, so in May of 2020, we were supposed to have done a vault premiere of Swaha, and we had put lots of dancers on contract, and in May, pandemic's happening, and none of us know, you told me not to say this word, nobody knew what was going on. And I had dancers on contract, and I decided that we would do online processes. I was like, it's the new world, and I can't fire these people. I made a commitment. And so we started doing these online processes, and on the very first rehearsal, like I just remember, I just had so much anxiety about what was this and what were we doing, and I just felt like to ground myself, there were things that I wanted to say, and that they were things that needed to be repeated every day as we were doing the process. And there were things like, and one of them was, we were living in a pandemic, and I said, we will remember this. And we do remember joy. And there were many other things, but that was where that particular line came from.
Yeah, and for me, this is the beginning of, you know, one of my chapters. I found my dance in a bomb shelter. That was always, even before the pandemic, I remember saying, if I was to write a book, that would be the title. And then, and I consulted with Amy, with Karen, and with my family. And then the second part of it, the gratitude, it was a long discussion that we had. And we went through a number of different variations because it was really important for me, because I've also had some very negative experiences. But of course, with hindsight, I see the positive aspect of them. And I still want to thank that person for giving me an experience that was devastating at that time, but became just a godsend afterwards. So how do we express this gratitude to all those individuals that have affected my life? And so that's where we finally came up with the second title. Did you want to answer?
Sure, I'll affirm that we will remember this is a part of the kind of recitation ritual that Nova developed through the pandemic, and we were toying with a variety of titles, and then I think I had suggested, hey, what about this? And it felt right. It felt right. And then Amy was like, you have to add the Bhattacharya Swaha because no one will know what it's about. And all of that, and we're like, okay, fine. So that's how it came to be. But I guess I'll just, like, we will remember this implies that we're responding to a moment. And in that time, it was like the pandemic, which in many ways carries on, like we're still living through COVID. But I guess, like, when I was thinking about this book yesterday, like, it made it clear to me that we're living in a moment itself right now. And what I wanted to say is that, like, as dance artists, as people that believe in movement, as people that believe that movement needs to be recorded and documented for future generations, it feels prescient, at least, to talk about or have an awareness as artists of the movement, of what we're living through right now, which in your land acknowledgement, you reference genocide, and we're living through a genocide in Palestine. And sorry, I just say that because as artists, it's important to confront and interrogate how our art is supported. And there's opportunities and avenues to ensure that what we do doesn't sustain violence. And while this book came to its fruition through living at a time that carries on, what we're living through right now continues to affect us. And I'm sure people in this room are aware, but dance makers and Toronto Dance London have a statement of solidarity and support that feels important to amplify with this tiny platform.
Mic check, can you hear me? Okay. First of all, yeah, I think dance literature is so important, so kudos to all of you to actually finishing a book. Some of you spoke a little bit about the challenges that some of you spoke to the challenges of writing the book and the process. Like, it could be hard, you wanted to sort of throw in the towel. So with that said, after this process and publishing a book, would you publish another book or would you write another book? Do you have any other writing projects? And if you were to write and publish another book, is there anything that you would do differently? Thank you.
I would not write at 4 a.m. I actually am working on another book that I started over 20 years ago and have finally come back to. So yes, I would like to write more books and have lots of ideas for that. But the squeezing it in factor is definitely a challenge, but it's, you try to make space.
One part of the answer is yes, absolutely. I would love to be involved in more books. And also, I have a rock opera I have to do. I have a long list of dances I have to make. But I think in terms of what I would do differently is avoid a pandemic. No, but in seriousness, I think it was a valuable experience, and it is something that I feel like
because it has so much importance to document the work that we're doing, and there are so many different entry points and ways to approach it, that it would be, and I did think of it as a book in process, and not that I would necessarily revisit Swaha, but if there was some other work or some other entry point into writing about dance, I would definitely go there. And I think the only different thing would be to, again, just to inhale and exhale and allow oneself the grace that just because it's in print, it doesn't have to be perfect. And that it's just a record of a moment of time, and that we all know that time moves forward.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things Karen and I are talking about is also co-authoring a book on the company and its history. And oftentimes when I'm talking to other dance artists, especially of my generation, because there's not a lot of us around anymore, in the field is what I mean, but even if they're in other fields, I'll say, you need to write your stories, you need to write your history. Like, if it's not written down, no one's going to do it for you. And it's essential to us, and I've passed so many people on to Amy, especially when I was doing research, like with Louise and things. I said, you've got to get in touch and write your stories, because our future generations need to know that we've had such a rich community over the decades, over, a century, and we need to hear all of our voices, not just one or two. And it doesn't have to be written in great grammar. I'm horrific at it. But just to write it, to express yourself. And before I pass it on, the other person I want to thank is Michael for the design and for everything you've done for the books too. It's been absolutely brilliant.
I think I would love to write a book, perhaps a little while into the future. I don't really feel compelled. Like, I don't have a book in me right now.
Agent, don't give away my full name. Hello. It's actually not a question. I think it's a comment, and to say congratulations on writing it. I think it's so important in the Canadian context that there are not many books where artists are art making or experiences of artists. And so I want to just say thank you, because it's such a key and important part in locating your work in the Canadian context as well, and in the art sector. So that's my big up, because I think it's important. Oh, and of course, Pablo, thank you most on Facebook. It's really. And I mean, if I give another comment, it's even as someone who's also published and invited artists to publish, Nova's contribution to the publication I had was so unusual, because it didn't follow a form that was traditional. It was like pointers and notes and time, and I'm like, are you sure? And she actually was like, are you sure? I was like, it's perfect, because it's documenting your work, your thoughts and ideas, and it was actually the most unique in the publication.
Thank you.
And the deadline was a week after the premiere of Swaha. You gave me an extension.
Thank you for the extension. Really, I think I really just want to voice thank you to Miriam and Adam and Amy and Michael for the platform, for giving this holding tank for dance artists who live and breathe and make work in Canada. And that's what I want to honor at this very moment.
And so, thank you so much for this discussion, for sharing your work. Thank you to the audience as well. I feel a lot of emotions right now, and really appreciate this conversation about dance. I heard dance as understanding, I heard dance as love, I heard dance as peace, I heard dance as wholeness as well. And so, actually, before we close officially, I'd like us to take a moment and take 3 deep breaths together, just thinking about the importance of dance in our lives. So thank you so much to Brannavy, Jeyasundaram, to Alan Kaeja, to Nova Bhattacharya, and to Emilie, Bowring.
Thank you.
And so we want to invite you to our reception and to, mingling, connect.